Principal expelled the troublemaker. Until his test scores broke school records. The expulsion papers sat on Principal Margaret Foster's desk, waiting for her signature. 15-year-old Damon Williams had pushed her patience to the breaking point with his constant disruptions, defiant attitude, and complete disregard for classroom rules. She was about to sign away what she thought was just another problem student. What she didn't know was that she was about to expel the most brilliant mind her school had ever seen, a genius hiding in plain sight whose test scores would soon shatter every academic record in the district's history. But what happened next would change everything she thought she knew about troubled students and hidden potential. Meet Damon Williams, a sophomore at Roosevelt High School in inner-city Detroit. To his teachers, Damon was the classic troublemaker. Always talking back, frequently absent, turning in assignments late when he turned them in at all. He wore oversized hoodies, kept his head down, and seemed to take pride in disrupting every class he attended. His disciplinary file was thick with infractions, talking during lectures, arguing with teachers, leaving class without permission, and what educators politely called attitude problems. Most of his teachers had given up trying to reach him months ago. "He's just not college material," his English teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had confided to Principal Foster. "Some kids are meant for academic success and others, well, others need to find different paths." What none of them realized was that Damon's attitude problems stemmed from a much different source than they imagined. While his classmates struggled with basic algebra, Damon was mentally solving calculus problems. While they labored over simple essay assignments, Damon was composing complex philosophical arguments in his head that would challenge graduate students. The problem wasn't that Damon couldn't handle the work. It was that he was so far beyond it that sitting through remedial explanations felt like torture. Damon had taught himself advanced mathematics by checking out college textbooks from the public library. He'd read every science book in the school library by the end of his freshman year and had moved on to research papers he found online. He spoke 3 languages fluently and was teaching himself a 4th. But none of this was apparent to his teachers, who saw only a disruptive teenager who seemed determined to waste his potential. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in Mr. Peterson's chemistry class. Peterson was explaining basic atomic structure to the class, drawing simplified diagrams on the whiteboard and using analogies that Damon found painfully elementary. "So you see, class," Peterson was saying, "atoms are like little solar systems with electrons orbiting around the nucleus like planets around the sun." Damon couldn't help himself. "That model was disproven like 100 years ago," he muttered, not quite under his breath. "Electrons don't orbit in fixed paths. They exist in probability clouds described by quantum mechanical wave functions." The class fell silent. Peterson's face reddened with embarrassment and anger. "Mr. Williams," Peterson said through gritted teeth, "if you think you know so much about chemistry, perhaps you'd like to teach the class yourself?" It was meant as sarcasm, but Damon took the challenge seriously. He stood up and walked to the whiteboard, ignoring Peterson's shocked expression. "Actually, yeah, I would," Damon said, grabbing a marker. "Because what you're teaching is wrong and these kids deserve better." What happened next left the entire class speechless. Damon began drawing complex orbital diagrams, explaining electron configuration, and describing quantum mechanical principles with the fluency of a graduate student. He talked about s, p, d, and f orbitals, described how electron spin affected chemical bonding, and explained why the planetary model was a harmful oversimplification. For 15 minutes, Damon transformed that classroom into something resembling a college-level chemistry course. His explanations were clear, his diagrams were accurate, and his understanding of the subject matter was obviously profound. The students sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were witnessing. This was the same troublemaker they'd written off as a lost cause, demonstrating knowledge that seemed impossible for someone his age. Peterson, meanwhile, was furious. Not because Damon was wrong, but because he was right and Peterson knew it. The teacher felt humiliated in front of his own students by a 15-year-old who had just exposed the limitations of his own understanding. "Sit down, Mr. Williams," Peterson snapped. "This is my classroom and I'll teach it my way." "Your way is wrong," Damon replied flatly. "You're confusing these kids with outdated models because you never learned the real science yourself." That was the final straw. Peterson sent Damon to the principal's office with a disciplinary referral that would lead to his expulsion recommendation. In Principal Foster's office, Damon sat slumped in the chair across from her desk, looking every inch the defiant teenager she expected to see. His hoodie was pulled up, his arms were crossed, and his expression was one of barely controlled contempt. "Damon," Principal Foster began, This is your third major incident this semester. Mr. Peterson says you were completely disrespectful, that you disrupted his entire class and embarrassed him in front of other students. Damon shrugged. I told the truth. If that's embarrassing, maybe he should learn some actual chemistry. Principal Foster sighed. She'd had this conversation with dozens of students over her 20-year career. In her experience, kids who talked back like this were usually covering up their academic insecurities with bravado. Damon, I know school can be challenging when you're struggling with the material. Struggling? Damon looked up sharply, his hood falling back to reveal intense, intelligent eyes. Lady, I'm not struggling with anything. I'm dying of boredom. If you're bored, it's because you're not applying yourself, Principal Foster replied, falling back on the standard administrative response. Your grades are barely passing. You miss assignments regularly. Your test scores are. She paused, pulling up Damon's academic record on her computer. Something didn't make sense. His grades were indeed poor, mostly C's and D's with occasional F's. But his standardized test scores were unusual. Damon, she said slowly, I'm looking at your state assessment scores from last year. There seems to be some kind of error in the system. Damon rolled his eyes. What kind of error? It shows you scored in the 99th percentile in mathematics, the 98th percentile in reading comprehension, and the 97th percentile in scientific reasoning. She looked up from her screen. That can't be right. Students with scores like these don't fail chemistry class. I didn't fail chemistry class, Damon said. I failed to pretend that bad teaching was acceptable. For the first time, Principal Foster really looked at Damon. Not as a disciplinary problem, but as a puzzle that didn't fit together. High test scores but poor grades. Obvious intelligence but constant behavioral issues. Advanced vocabulary but apparent lack of motivation. Damon, she said carefully, can you explain something to me? If you're as smart as these test scores suggest, why are you failing your classes? Damon was quiet for a long moment, as if deciding whether she was worth his honesty. Because, he said finally, when you already know everything they're trying to teach, sitting through 6 hours of slow explanations every day makes you want to crawl out of your skin. When teachers get mad at you for asking questions beyond their lesson plans, you stop asking questions. When you get punished for being ahead instead of behind, you stop trying to get ahead. Principal Foster felt something shift in her understanding. What do you mean you already know everything they're trying to teach? I mean, I finished the chemistry textbook in September. I've read every math book in the school library. I could probably test out of most of these classes if anyone bothered to find out what I actually know instead of assuming I'm just another hood rat who doesn't care about school. The conversation that followed changed everything. For the next hour, Principal Foster asked Damon questions that revealed the depth of his knowledge and the source of his frustration. She discovered that he'd been teaching himself advanced subjects for years, that he'd exhausted the academic resources available to him, and that his behavioral problems were really symptoms of severe intellectual understimulation. Damon, she said when their conversation concluded, I need to ask you something and I want you to be completely honest with me. If I could arrange for you to take some diagnostic tests, advanced tests that would show us exactly what you know, would you be willing to do that? Damon studied her suspiciously. What kind of tests? College-level placement exams. SAT subject tests. Advanced placement exams. Tests that would tell us whether you're ready for work beyond what we can offer here. For the first time since he'd entered her office, Damon looked genuinely interested. You serious? Dead serious. But in exchange, I need you to work with me on your behavior. No more disrupting classes, no more arguments with teachers. Can you do that? Damon considered the offer. What happens if the tests show what I think they'll show? Then we figure out how to give you the education you actually need instead of the one you're supposed to want. The testing took place over the following week. Principal Foster arranged for Damon to take SAT subject tests in mathematics, chemistry, physics, and literature. She also had him take several AP exams and a general college placement assessment. While they waited for results, something interesting happened in Damon's classes. Knowing that his academic abilities were being taken seriously for the first time, his behavior began to improve dramatically. He stopped disrupting classes, completed assignments, and even started helping other students who were struggling. His teachers were baffled by the transformation. It's like he became a different person overnight, Mrs. Henderson told Principal Foster. He's still clearly bored, but he's not taking it out on the class anymore. When the test results came back 2 weeks later, Principal Foster had to read them 3 times to believe what she was seeing. Damon had scored a perfect 800 on the SAT mathematics subject test. His chemistry score was 790. Physics, 780. Literature, 770. These were scores that typically belonged to the top students at elite preparatory schools, not to a troublemaker from an underfunded urban high school. The AP exam results were even more stunning. Damon had earned a 5, the highest possible score, on AP Calculus BC, AP Chemistry, AP Physics C, and AP English Literature. He had essentially demonstrated college-level mastery in multiple subjects. The college placement exam showed he was ready for advanced coursework that most students didn't encounter until their junior or senior year of college. Principal Foster stared at the results, feeling a mixture of amazement and shame. Here was a student whose intelligence was literally off the charts, and the school system had been treating him like a problem to be managed rather than a genius to be nurtured. She called Damon into her office the next morning to share the results. "Damon," she began, "I owe you an apology. A big one." She showed him the test scores, watching his expression change from wariness to satisfaction to something that might have been vindication. "So what now?" he asked. "You gonna let me skip some classes?" "I'm going to do better than that," Principal Foster replied. "I'm going to completely redesign your education." What followed was unprecedented in the school's history. Working with the district's gifted education coordinator and several local universities, Principal Foster created an individualized program that challenged Damon appropriately. He would spend mornings at the high school, but taking advanced independent study courses and serving as a peer tutor for other students. His afternoons would be spent at nearby Wayne State University, where he would audit undergraduate courses and subjects that interested him. Most importantly, he would work with Dr. Sarah Chin, a professor of education who specialized in exceptionally gifted students, to help him develop the social and emotional skills he needed to navigate his unusual intellectual abilities. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Given appropriate challenges, Damon flourished in ways that amazed everyone who worked with him. His university professors were initially skeptical about having a high school student in their classes, but they quickly recognized his exceptional abilities. "In 30 years of teaching," said Dr. Rodriguez, who taught the advanced calculus course Damon attended, "I've never had a student grasp complex mathematical concepts as quickly as Damon does. He's not just smart, he's intuitive in a way that can't be taught." Back at Roosevelt High, Damon's role as a peer tutor revealed another dimension of his abilities. He had a gift for explaining complex concepts in ways that other students could understand, breaking down difficult material without talking down to his peers. "Damon helped me understand chemistry better in 1 hour than I learned all semester," said Jessica Martinez, a junior who had been failing the subject. "He doesn't make you feel stupid for not getting it. He just finds different ways to explain it until something clicks." The ripple effects of Damon's transformation extended throughout the school. His success forced administrators and teachers to reconsider their assumptions about other problem students. Were there other hidden geniuses being overlooked because they didn't fit traditional models of academic success? Principal Foster initiated a comprehensive review of students with disciplinary issues, looking for patterns that might indicate unrecognized giftedness. They found several students whose behavioral problems seemed to correlate with signs of high ability and academic frustration. "Damon's case taught us that sometimes what looks like defiance is really disappointment," Principal Foster explained to the school board. "When bright students are chronically understimulated, they can develop behaviors that look like problems but are really symptoms of educational mismatch." 6 months into his new program, Damon's story gained national attention when his research project on quantum computing applications was accepted for presentation at a major scientific conference. Here was a 16-year-old from an inner-city high school presenting original research to PhD scientists and industry professionals. The media attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Damon was featured in magazines, interviewed on television, and offered scholarships to prestigious universities. But he was also subjected to skepticism from people who couldn't believe that such exceptional talent could emerge from his background. "Some people act like being smart and being from the hood are mutually exclusive," Damon said in one interview. "Like intelligence only counts if it comes with the right zip code and the right accent." The attention also revealed the broader implications of his story. How many other students were being failed by educational systems that couldn't recognize or nurture exceptional ability when it didn't come in expected packages? Dr. Chin, who had been working with Damon on his social and emotional development, published a paper about his case that became influential in gifted education circles. "Damon represents a type of student we consistently fail to identify," she wrote. Gifted students from disadvantaged backgrounds often develop coping mechanisms that mask their abilities. They may become class clowns, rebels, or withdrawn personalities rather than traditional high achievers. A year after those first diagnostic tests, Damon was thriving in ways that seemed impossible when he'd been headed for expulsion. He was taking graduate-level mathematics courses, conducting independent research, and had already been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship for the following year. But perhaps most importantly, he had maintained his connection to Roosevelt High School and his community. He continued tutoring other students and had started a program to identify and support other potentially gifted students who might be overlooked by traditional screening methods. Just because I got opportunities doesn't mean I should forget where I came from, Damon explained to a reporter. There are probably dozens of kids in schools around here who are just as smart as me but don't know it because nobody's ever told them they could be. The program he created, called Hidden Genius Initiative, used unconventional methods to identify high-potential students. Instead of relying solely on grades and test scores, they looked for students who showed creativity, asked unusual questions, or demonstrated deep knowledge in areas that interested them, even if their formal academic performance was poor. Within 2 years, the program had identified and begun supporting over 30 students who showed signs of exceptional ability but had been previously overlooked. Some, like Damon, were academic underachievers whose intelligence was masked by behavioral issues. Others were students whose talents lay in areas not traditionally recognized by schools. The success stories that emerged were remarkable. There was Maria, whose poor English grades had hidden her mathematical genius. She was actually thinking in advanced algebraic concepts but struggling to express them in her second language. There was Kevin, whose ADHD had been seen as purely disruptive until someone realized he was finishing assignments quickly and acting out from boredom. There was Aisha, whose artistic talents had been dismissed as not academic, until she demonstrated that her visual thinking abilities translated to exceptional spatial reasoning skills. Each success reinforced the central lesson of Damon's story. Exceptional ability often hides behind unexpected exteriors, and traditional methods of identifying talent miss more students than they find. 3 years after nearly being expelled, Damon graduated from high school as valedictorian, not because his grades had improved, but because the school had finally learned how to measure his actual achievements. His graduation speech became legendary in education circles. 3 years ago, I was about to be kicked out of school for being a troublemaker, he told his graduating class. What I was really being punished for was being different. I learned something important from that experience. The difference between a troublemaker and a genius might just be whether someone takes the time to find out what you're really capable of. He looked directly at Principal Foster, who was sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. To the educators out there, some of your most challenging students might be your most gifted. Before you give up on us, maybe try to figure out if we're acting out because we can't handle the work or because the work can't handle us. The speech was viewed millions of times online and became a rallying cry for educational reform advocates who argued that schools needed to do better at recognizing and nurturing diverse forms of giftedness. At MIT, Damon continued to excel academically while maintaining his commitment to identifying overlooked talent. He founded a nonprofit organization that provided resources and advocacy for gifted students from underserved communities, ensuring that his story would inspire systemic change rather than being dismissed as an isolated case. People love to call stories like mine inspirational, Damon said during his freshman year at MIT, but inspiration without action is just entertainment. If my experience doesn't lead to changes that help other kids like me, then it's just a feel-good story that makes people think the system is working when it really isn't. Principal Foster, meanwhile, had become a national speaker on the topic of recognizing hidden giftedness. She spoke at conferences, consulted with school districts, and helped develop new protocols for identifying students whose abilities were masked by behavioral or environmental factors. Damon taught me that we see what we expect to see, she would tell audiences. When we expect certain types of students to be problems, we miss the signs that they might actually be solutions. When we're looking for compliance instead of brilliance, we overlook the kids who could change the world. 5 years after nearly expelling him, Principal Foster kept a photo on her desk of Damon receiving his first scientific research award. It served as a daily reminder that her most important job wasn't maintaining order or enforcing rules. It was recognizing potential in all its forms and fighting to nurture it, even when it came disguised as defiance. The story of Damon Williams became more than just an individual success story. It became a catalyst for examining how educational systems identify, support, and develop exceptional talent. His journey from troublemaker, To recognize genius forced educators, policymakers, and parents to confront uncomfortable questions about bias, assumptions, and missed opportunities. How many other Damons were sitting in detention halls instead of advanced classes? How many potential innovators, researchers, and leaders were being written off as problems instead of being recognized as solutions? How many hidden geniuses were going unrecognized because their brilliance didn't look the way educators expected it to look? Damon's test scores had indeed broken school records, but more importantly, his story had broken through the assumptions and stereotypes that prevent countless students from reaching their potential. He proved that genius doesn't always come with perfect grades, compliant behavior, or advantaged backgrounds. Sometimes genius comes disguised as defiance, hidden behind hoodies and attitude, waiting for someone brave enough to look past the surface and discover the extraordinary mind beneath. In a world quick to label and dismiss, Damon Williams reminded everyone that the most brilliant students might be the ones who challenge us the most, not because they can't learn, but because they're ready to learn things we never imagined they could master. What assumptions do you make about students who don't fit traditional models of academic success? Have you ever encountered someone whose true abilities were hidden behind behavioral challenges? Share your thoughts, because recognizing hidden genius might be the most important skill educators can develop in preparing students for an unpredictable future.